They gave us the songs we danced to, the songs we cried to, the songs that played at every defining moment of our lives. And one by one, cancer took them. Brain tumors, breast cancer, lung cancer, leukemia. Some of them were barely 30 years old. Some had just reached the height of their powers. All of them deserved more time. Tonight, 12 iconic R&B stars who built the soundtrack of a generation and the disease that silenced them.
Bring the stage to a pleasant.
Number 12, Tammi Terrell.
There you are, no matter how far.
Don't worry, baby.
Thomasina Montgomery, born in Philadelphia in 1945. She was 17 years old and singing on the road with James Brown when the physical abuse began, documented by multiple witnesses, including members of Brown's own touring band. She eventually escaped that situation and made her way to Berry Gordy and Motown, where she was signed, renamed Tammi Terrell, and paired with Marvin Gaye for a series of duets that became some of the most joyful recordings in soul music history.
I told you could always count on me.
Ain't No Mountain High Enough was written by Nicholas Ashford and Valerie Simpson and recorded in 1967. It reached number 19 on the Hot 100 and number 3 on the R&B chart, launching one of the most beloved vocal partnerships in the history of soul music. The record sounds like two people completely in love with music, with each other, and with the specific miracle of singing something together that neither of them could achieve alone. On October 14, 1967, while performing with Marvin Gaye at Hampden-Sydney College in Virginia, Tammi Terrell collapsed into his arms mid-performance. She was 22 years old. The diagnosis came back, a malignant brain tumor. She underwent 8 brain surgeries over the following 2 years. By 1969, she was confined to a wheelchair. She had lost the ability to stand, lost most of her sight, and weighed less than 100 pounds. Marvin Gaye was so devastated by what was happening to his partner that he has said he struggled to enter recording studios for years afterward. He later described the experience as the defining trauma of his artistic life. Tammi Terrell's mother, furious at Motown's failure to protect her daughter from the men around her, banned the entire label from the funeral. Only Marvin Gaye was permitted to attend. He delivered the eulogy. Tammi Terrell died on March 16, 1970. She was 24 years old. Number 11, Junior Parker. Herman Junior Parker was born near Bobo, Mississippi in 1932, grew up in the Memphis blues world, and by the early 1950s had established himself as one of the most distinctive voices in the blues soul tradition, a voice his contemporaries consistently described as honeyed and velvet smooth, possessing an impossible combination of warmth and control that made him the envy of every singer who heard him. Mystery Train, recorded for Sun Records in 1953, is one of the most foundational recordings in the history of American popular music. The train as metaphor, the locomotive that takes away the ones you love, the rhythm section locked into an unstoppable rolling groove, became the template for a specific strand of American music that runs from the Memphis blues straight through to rock and roll. Elvis Presley heard Parker's Mystery Train and covered it for Sun Records in 1955. Sam Phillips, who recorded both artists, understood that Parker had created something that would outlast any individual recording of it. But Parker himself spent the 1950s and 1960s building a career on the blues soul circuit that remained largely beneath the commercial radar of mainstream American popular music. He recorded for Duke Records in Houston, toured consistently, and produced a body of work that soul and blues collectors now regard with genuine reverence. His 1957 recording, Next Time You See Me, is another essential document of his artistry. In 1971, Parker developed a brain tumor and underwent surgery. On November 18, 1971, Herman Jr. Parker died during the operation. He was 39 years old. He died on the operating table, in the middle of surgery intended to save his life. The man Elvis Presley covered died at 39 in an operating room before the music world had properly understood what it had. Elvis attended his funeral. The train that Mystery Train described just kept rolling, right through the life of the man who wrote it. Number 10. Minnie Riperton. Minnie Riperton had a 5-octave vocal range. That is not a metaphor or an exaggeration. She had been tested and documented as possessing one of the most extraordinary natural vocal instruments in the history of recorded music, capable of reaching notes that most singers can't produce at all, let alone sustain with the warmth and control she brought to every performance. She recorded Lovin You in 1973 with her husband Richard Rudolph as a lullaby, a private song meant specifically for their infant daughter Maya. The track was included on her 1974 album Perfect Angel, produced by Stevie Wonder. When Capitol Records released Lovin You as a single in early 1975, it went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and held that position for 5 weeks. The lullaby, written for a baby daughter, became the biggest hit of Minnie Riperton's career. In 1976, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She underwent a mastectomy, and rather than retreat from public life, she became one of the most visible and effective advocates the American Cancer Society had ever had, speaking openly, publicly, and without shame about her diagnosis and treatment at a time when the stigma around cancer, and around breast cancer specifically, was profound. In 1978, President Jimmy Carter presented Riperton with the American Cancer Society's Courage Award at the White House. She stood in the White House, accepting an award for the bravery with which she had faced a disease that was consuming her. She kept recording.
Can make me feel the color.
The album Minnie was completed in the final months of her life, and a music video filmed on May 25, 1979, 6 weeks before she died, shows a woman determined to give everything she had to the end. Minnie Riperton died on July 12, 1979. She was 31 years old. Maya Rudolph, the baby daughter for whom Lovin You was written, grew up to be one of the most beloved comic performers in America. She has spoken throughout her career about what it means to carry her mother's love inside a song. Number 9. Bobby Lester. Bobby Lester was the lead tenor of the Moonglows, the Chicago vocal group that Berry Gordy has cited as among the most significant influences on the Motown sound he later developed. Harvey Fuqua assembled the Moonglows in Cleveland in the early 1950s, and when Bobby Lester joined as lead vocalist, the group found the sound that would define them: close, dense vocal harmonies with Lester's clear, precise tenor cutting through the arrangement. Sincerely, released in 1954 and produced by Alan Freed, who controversially took a songwriting credit in exchange for airplay, reached number 1 on the R&B chart and crossed over to the pop chart, where it competed directly with the McGuire Sisters cover version. The McGuire Sisters had the advantage of radio infrastructure and label support that the Moonglows were not granted. Their version went higher on the pop chart. but anyone who has heard both recordings knows which one contains the actual soul.
Don't you know that I love you?
The Moonglows were the group that introduced a teenage Marvin Gaye to Berry Gordy. Gordy initially signed the group, not Gaye. It was Moonglows touring and performing, with Lester out front, that showed Gordy what a vocal group could do and planted the seeds of what would become Motown.
All right. Well, come on, Charlie. Get on down there.
Bobby Lester struggled financially through much of his post-Moonglows career. The label arrangements of the 1950s were not structured for artist benefit, and the royalties from Sincerely and the group's other recordings did not provide the financial security they should have.
You gotta do is be mine, 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 mine.
He died of lung cancer on October 6, 1980, in Louisville, Kentucky. He was 49 years old. The man whose voice had helped teach Berry Gordy what soul could be died at 49, quietly, in the city he had retired to.
Won't you tell me why? Love that.
Number 8. Mary Wells. Mary Wells walked into Berry Gordy's office at 17 with a song she'd written for Jackie Wilson and the most naturally gifted voice Berry Gordy had heard in years. He signed her immediately and had her record the song herself. She became Motown's first nationally significant female artist, the voice that carried the label into pop radio before the Supremes had their commercial breakthrough. My Guy, written and produced by Smokey Robinson, hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in April 1964, the very first time Motown had ever topped the mainstream American pop chart. Mary Wells was 21 years old. She had given Berry Gordy's label its commercial validation, and she had done it with a performance of such easy, radiant confidence that the record sounds like it was the simplest thing in the world to make. It was not. She left Motown at 21, manipulated by her husband, and spent the following decades watching her commercial standing decline. In 1990, she was diagnosed with laryngeal cancer, cancer of the larynx, of the voice box itself, the most specific and devastating possible disease for a singer. The cancer destroyed her ability to speak above a whisper. The voice that had given Motown its first pop number 1 was reduced to something she could barely project across a room. Friends organized fundraisers. Bruce Springsteen contributed $10,000. Rod Stewart contributed $10,000. Diana Ross contributed $15,000. The R&B Foundation raised more than $50,000. None of it was sufficient. Mary Wells filed suit against Motown for unpaid royalties the year before she died. The label settled for a 6-figure sum that arrived too late to change the fundamental reality of her situation. Mary Wells died on July 26, 1992. She was 49 years old. The voice that started Motown's commercial history was silenced by the disease that most specifically targets voices. If you're locked into this one, most people scrolling past these songs have no idea what it took to make them. We digs that history back up, one record at a time. The subscribe button costs nothing, and it means you won't miss the next one. Number 7. Eddie Kendricks. Eddie Kendricks was the falsetto voice of the early Temptations, the high, pure, bell-clear tone that drove The Way You Do the Things You Do, Get Ready, and Just My Imagination into their emotional registers. When he left the Temptations in 1971 to pursue a solo career, the label and the world waited to see whether the voice that had defined a group could sustain a career on its own. The answer was yes. Keep On Truckin', released in 1973, went to number 1 on the Hot 100. Boogie Down followed it to number 5 in 1974. Eddie Kendricks, solo artist, was a genuine commercial success, proof that the falsetto voice could carry a whole career without 4 other temptations supporting it. In 1991, Kendricks was diagnosed with lung cancer. He had been a heavy smoker for decades, the specific, private cost that would eventually be paid. He made a decision that reflects both the severity of the diagnosis and the particular kind of determination it takes to face cancer. Honestly, he underwent surgery to have one of his lungs removed. One lung removed in the hope that taking the diseased tissue out would stop the cancer's progression. He continued to tour through 1992 with one lung. He performed. He gave people the falsetto voice they had come specifically to hear, with the physical capacity of a man who had lost half his respiratory function. He fell ill again in the summer of 1992 and was hospitalized. Eddie Kendricks died on October 5, 1992, in Birmingham, Alabama, the city of his birth, with his children beside him. He was 52 years old. When David Ruffin had died in a crack house in Philadelphia the previous year, Kendricks had reportedly sat in complete silence for a long time after hearing the news. A year later, the falsetto that had outlasted everything else was gone too. Number 6. Gene McFadden. Gene McFadden and John Whitehead were the Philadelphia soul songwriting and performing duo who had worked in the background of the music industry for years before stepping into the spotlight themselves. They had written songs for Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, working within the Philadelphia International Records orbit that Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff had built into the dominant force in 1970s Black American music. Ain't No Stoppin' Us Now, released in 1979, was written by McFadden, Whitehead, and Jerry Cohen, a song of pure, uncomplicated uplift built on a 4-on-the-floor groove and a lyric about forward motion that has made it one of the most durable motivational anthems in the history of R&B. It hit number 13 on the Hot 100 and number 1 on the R&B chart. It has been used at sporting events, at political rallies, at graduation ceremonies, at moments of collective celebration across 5 decades. The song's thesis, "We are moving forward and nothing can stop us," has proven to be universally applicable in a way its creators could not fully have anticipated. Gene McFadden's own story did not align with the anthem's triumphant message. He had spent decades in the music industry, receiving modest financial returns for songwriting contributions that had generated significant income for labels and for other artists.
But now it looks like things are finally coming around.
The financial architecture of the Philadelphia soul world in the 1970s did not always direct adequate compensation toward the writers who built it.
We got to do.
Gene McFadden was diagnosed with cancer and fought it for years. He died on January 27, 2006, in Philadelphia. He was 56 years old. Ain't No Stoppin' Us Now, the song about unstoppable forward motion, was playing at a Super Bowl event the same week he died, audible on televisions across America, while the man who co-wrote it was buried in the city where he'd built his career. Number 5. Teddy Pendergrass. Teddy Pendergrass had one of the most physically commanding voices in the history of soul music. Raw, gravelly, undeniably masculine in the specific way that made women throw undergarments onto his stage during his solo tours. He had emerged from Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, where he had been the drummer who gradually became the most important voice in the room, and launched a solo career that produced 5 consecutive platinum albums, a record for any artist at that time. Close the Door, from his 1978 album Life is a Song Worth Singing, hit #1 on the R&B chart and reached number 25 on the Hot 100. It is one of the definitive Quiet Storm recordings, the kind of intimate, late-night soul record that exists at the precise intersection of romance and physical desire that Pendergrass had made his commercial specialty. In March 1982, Pendergrass was involved in a car accident in Philadelphia that left him paralyzed from the chest down. He spent years rebuilding his life from a wheelchair, learning to perform again, recording again, refusing to disappear. In 2001, he published his autobiography. In 2007, he announced his retirement. Just to hold you gently in my love. 2 years later, in 2009, Pendergrass was diagnosed with colon cancer. He underwent surgery. He spent the last year of his life managing both the paralysis that had confined him to a wheelchair for nearly 3 decades and the cancer that was now consuming him from within. Teddy Pendergrass died on January 13, 2010, in suburban Philadelphia. He was 59 years old. He had spent 28 years fighting to rebuild a career and a life after the accident. He then spent his final year fighting a disease that arrived just as he had found a way to accept the terms of the life the accident had given him. Number 4. Damon Harris. I never got a chance to see. Damon Harris joined the Temptations at 18 years old in 1971 and spent the next 4 years singing with one of the most commercially successful groups in the history of soul music. That day I'll always remember. Yes, I will. He was one of the youngest members the group had ever had. Recruited as the post-David Ruffin, post-Eddie Kendricks Temptations attempted to maintain their commercial standing. Papa was a Rolling Stone. Papa was a Rolling Stone, released in 1972, is one of the most hypnotically constructed recordings in Motown's history. A nearly 12-minute album track built around a bass line, a wah-wah guitar, and a horn arrangement that locked together in a groove that never releases. Today in his life. And Mama. It hit #1 on the Hot 100 and #1 on the R&B chart and won 3 Grammys, including Record of the Year. Damon Harris sang on that record. He was 20 years old. Talking about saving souls and all the time. He left the Temptations in 1975 and spent the following decades navigating drug addiction, financial instability, and the specific kind of obscurity that comes from having been a famous face for a few years before the machine moved on without you. He eventually formed a Temptations tribute group called the Young Temps, performing the songs he had recorded at 18 to audiences who came specifically for the nostalgia of them. In the late 1990s, Damon Harris was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He was not in a position to afford the sustained medical treatment the diagnosis required. Hey mama, is it true what? The Motown Alumni Association, recognizing the situation, worked with him to establish the Damon Harris Prostate Cancer Foundation in Canton, Michigan, an attempt to turn his own diagnosis into something useful for other people in similar circumstances. Damon Harris died on February 18, 2013, in Baltimore, Maryland. He was 60 years old. He died homeless. Call himself a jack of all trades. Tell me, is that what? The Grammy he had won at 20 years old was in a box somewhere. The song he had sung that won it was still playing. Mama looked up with a tear in her eye and said, son. Number 3. Lou Rawls.
Someone who loves you.
Lou Rawls grew up in Chicago singing gospel in the same teenage vocal group as Sam Cooke, a historical fact that places him, before he had recorded a single professional note, in the company of the person who would later be recognized as one of the most transformative figures in American popular music.
Tender like I do.
They were friends, classmates, rivals in the specific way that gifted young singers who share a church community are rivals. Sam Cooke became Sam Cooke. Lou Rawls became something different, a voice that could move across more musical territory than almost anyone else in the business. You'll Never Find Another Love Like Mine, released in 1976 and produced by Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff at Philadelphia International Records, went to number 2 on the Hot 100 and number 1 on the R&B chart. It is the record most people associate with Rawls, that luxurious baritone moving through a lyric about romantic irreplaceability with the complete, unhurried confidence of a man who knows exactly what he has and knows you know it too. But Lou Rawls was more than a recording artist. For 20 years, he hosted the United Negro College Fund Telethon, an annual event that under his stewardship raised more than $200 million for scholarships and educational programs. He showed up every year. He asked people to give. He understood that his platform was borrowed from the culture that made him, and that the obligation that came with it was real. In 2005, Rawls was diagnosed with lung cancer and then with brain cancer. He was hospitalized at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, where reporters asked him how he was doing. "Don't count me out, brother," he said from his hospital room. Lou Rawls died on January 6, 2006, at the age of 72. The man who had raised $200 million for other people's education died fighting a disease he could not outspend.
Someone who needs you.
Number 2, Etta James.
Has come along.
Jamesetta Hawkins, born in Los Angeles in 1938. She was 15 years old when Johnny Otis signed her and changed her name to Etta James, the first of many changes in a life that would contain more extremes of fortune than almost any career in American music history. Extraordinary artistic heights followed by crushing personal lows. Great commercial success followed by years of addiction-driven obscurity. And then, eventually, the kind of late career recognition that comes when the world finally catches up with how exceptional something has always been. At Last, recorded for Argo Records in 1960, is one of the most recorded and performed ballads in the history of popular music. The arrangement, swirling strings, restrained rhythm section, Etta's voice finding the exact center of the lyric about finally finding love, is so precise and so complete that covering it feels presumptuous, as if anyone else singing the song is simply explaining what Etta James meant. In January 2009, at Barack Obama's inauguration, Beyoncé performed At Last as the first couple danced at one of the inaugural balls. Etta James, who was at that point already ill, expressed considerable frustration with the choice, publicly and in colorful terms.
A dream that
Whatever one thinks of the public reaction, the frustration spoke to something real. At Last was her song, in the most fundamental sense, and watching someone else perform it at the defining cultural moment of the era, while she was sick and receding from public life, was a particular kind of loss. Etta James had been diagnosed with leukemia. She had also developed dementia. She died on January 20th, 2012, at Riverside Community Hospital in California. She was 73 years old, 6 decades of music.
and then
A voice that Rolling Stone ranked number 22 among the 100 greatest singers of all time, and a leukemia that her doctor had declared incurable just weeks before the end came. Number 1. Minnie Riperton.
Loving you is
We told you part of Minnie Riperton's story earlier in this countdown.
and everything that I do.
Now we tell you all of it. She grew up in Chicago, received classical vocal training as a child, studied opera, was eventually told by her teachers that she had the natural ability to pursue an operatic career. She turned toward soul and R&B instead, toward the specific kind of music that connected the gospel roots of her community with the popular culture of her era. She joined a psychedelic soul group called Rotary Connection in the late 1960s, making recordings that were decades ahead of their time, and then worked with Stevie Wonder, who recognized her extraordinary vocal ability and produced her 1974 album Perfect Angel.
Has made my life so beautiful.
But the full story of Lovin You is this. Minnie Riperton recorded the song as a lullaby for her daughter Maya. She sang it to Maya before she slept. She wrote it with her husband Richard Rudolph as a private act of love, not a commercial calculation.
Love is filled with love.
The fact that it went to number 1 on the Hot 100, that millions of strangers heard a song she had written for one specific baby, in one specific house, in one specific moment of parental tenderness, was something she processed as both extraordinary and slightly disorienting.
I see your soul come shine.
When she was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1976, she was 28 years old. She underwent a radical mastectomy. She chose to speak publicly about her diagnosis, to say the words out loud, to refuse the shame and silence that society still attached to cancer and to women's bodies in 1976. She became an American Cancer Society spokesperson. She spoke on television. She was presented with the Courage Award by President Carter at the White House in 1978, 2 years after the mastectomy, still performing, still recording, still bringing everything she had to every stage she stood on. She died on July 12, 1979. She was 31 years old. Maya Rudolph was 7. The lullaby her mother had written for her plays on the radio every day, somewhere in the world, without interruption. It has never stopped.
In springtime, 'cause love